When everything shut down, our business stepped up. Brands leaned in and made PPE. Billboards spread a message of love. As we settle into our new reality, it's not an option to put another Band-Aid on our problems. The time is now to recreate our industry, calling all great minds to rebuild.
The pandemic has created seismic changes in many aspects of our business, from viewership, sales, messaging, and consumer behavior. How permanent are these changes, and how have they impacted the New York and national landscape? We have a panel of experts here to bring us up to date. I would like to introduce Michael Minardi from the New York Interconnect, Linda Raniere from Team One, and Danielle DeLauro from the VAB. Michael, let's start with you. There's a lot of talk that New York is dead. Is it? What makes the New York market special? Let's talk current opportunities and challenges.
Thank you, Charlene. New York is far from dead. I think a lot of that talk has come from some of the articles and reports that we've seen about this migration out of Manhattan and the New York City area. And when you really look under the hood and start digging into some of the data, there's been a net migration, particularly out of Manhattan since about 2013. That's more people moving out than in. And then when you go a little bit further, what you're seeing is you're seeing a lot of the people who are staying within the DMA. You're seeing the moves to Connecticut up 75%, the moves to Long Island up 50%, Jersey was up 40%. So this is all great. So the people are really staying within the market. Sure, there are some people leaving, but a lot of them are staying within. And one of the things that we see is the viewership. Before the pandemic, we saw TV viewership increasing. It was only increasing about single-digit level, but then once the pandemic hit, we saw it increase double-digit level up upwards of 25% at some points. And then here in New York, we have this certain amount of pride, which makes the market so powerful. I mean, regardless of where you're from on Long Island, or if you're from Jersey or the boroughs, you always have this pride about being in the market. And that's what makes this market great. And that's what's going to keep making the market great, because everybody wants to get better, going to beat this pandemic and get through it. And then, have the opportunities that we have on a media landscape is really how we can reach the eyeballs. And one of the things that we could do here at the Interconnect is we can hit the traditional linear TV buyer. We can hit them up beyond that on extra screens with our OTT, VOD, cross-platform sale that we have, that we're able to really sit there and either we can purchase and have people purchase content or audiences.
Thank you. Linda, through the winter and spring, states issued stay-at-home orders. What was the immediate impact of strategy and spend for Lexus, both nationally and in New York? Was it a wait-and-see approach, and how long did it take to pivot?
We were able to pivot pretty quickly for Lexus in markets like New York. Many of our groups in that situation pulled back local video schedules, leaving TV support to National's customer-focused creative. We did recommend keeping initiatives live that were geared toward active Lexus shoppers, such as programmatic and search, to keep the interest going in the markets for people who were still actively shopping.
Great. Danielle, in focusing on consumer behavior, we saw that the pandemic caused a domino effect of other changes, like prime time is now all the time. How did you see viewing habits change? And do you think these changes are permanent or evolving?
Well, we think that the TV landscape is permanently changed. What we saw is that during COVID, families were multi-generationally sheltered in place. And what this did is it accelerated trial among different generations. So people were sitting together, gathered, looking for new content, and you had them leaning together and saying, what are different devices and platforms that I can utilize? And so what we saw through our research is that 2/3 of adults said that they tried new TV technology during COVID, and over half said they found new features on their smart TVs. And then we saw obviously streaming just accelerate huge during COVID. And so now we've seen that, half of adults are just as likely to sit down on their couch and flip on linear TV as they are a streaming service. And so I think what this means is that it's really about a content first approach for consumers. And it also should be about a content and audience first approach for marketers. And that's a real implication moving forward.
Michael, please give us an overview of the timeline pre-pandemic to today on the New York media marketplace. How would you say the market has evolved quarter to quarter, starting from fourth quarter to first quarter to second quarter to today?
Well, starting back in fourth quarter, we had fourth quarter is very strong in the New York market. Kicked off with MLB playoffs being a tremendous success, with the Yankees making a nice run there. Q1 started off a little slow. It's always that, you always have that odd time with the holiday falling late in the year. And you really start almost 2 weeks into the month of January. But then by February, it really started picking up momentum, and activity was very strong. And March was looking great. Particularly anchored by March Madness. And then, right around the 13th or so, just, the rug got pulled out from underneath everybody when people started staying home, and some of the stay-at-home orders came down. From a destination perspective, we couldn't go anywhere. So the travel category just dried up, from the cruises to Florida to the Caribbean. Those are all peak season times for them. And that really dried up. And then we're starting to see now, when you fast forward now to today, we're starting to see a lot of the clients come back. The dealerships are coming back more with that. We do see more activity from destination travel, albeit it's a little bit lighter than usual. And with, healthcare coming in really strong as well, has really buoyed this market as well.
Linda, New York has been known to bounce back from tragic events. What are those conversations with clients like?
Our Lexus dealer clients have really stayed focused on the needs of their customers throughout the pandemic and slow recovery. They're generally optimistic about the New York market and moving forward with initiatives to differentiate themselves and their vehicles from the competition. Like all New Yorkers, they're resilient.
Michael, you mentioned hospitality. It's very important to the New York market. Where do you see hospitality by, let's say, first quarter 2021?
Hospitality is really going to depend on an individual's comfort level and, how comfortable they are with going out at this point. And I don't think there's going to be many large-scale events. And we are seeing now some people getting together on a one-on-one basis, which is great. And really just, we just have to see it come along slowly and be respectful of everybody's decisions to that level.
Danielle, was there anything surprising to you about viewership during the height of the pandemic?
I think what surprised me the most, and I'm somebody who trends viewership for video every single day, is just the sheer volume of TV viewing that happened during the height of it. And I say that because of the fact that I understand that people had idle time on their hands, more than normal. But they also had access to every other device platform available, and yet people chose television, and that was regardless of demographic. And I think that as an industry, we hear again and again that adults and young kids and teens and young adults typically wouldn't turn to television. They would game, they would go on social media, they would, do something else besides turn to TV content. And what we saw instead was that when they did have that extra time, they went to television. And same with sports fans. Sports fans did the same thing. When sports went off the air, instead of redirecting that time to somewhere else, what they did is they redirected it to entertainment and to news content. And I think what this does is it allows us to kind of step back and ask, well, why? Why did that happen? Why did people make the choice to watch television during this time? And I think the answer comes down to the fact that television really is a centerpiece of our society. It's a place that, whether it is a crisis or not, people look to relax, people look to for entertainment. And I think that this was just a microcosm of that.
Well, it's a good segue to the next question. Michael, we know people love their sports. And while sports was off the air, fans were clamoring for content and they watched what was available like classic re-airing of games. Now that sports is back, it seems the viewers can't get enough. Tell us about the resurgence of live sports and how it impacted ad spend and viewership.
The return of live sports has been excellent because the sports viewer is a unique viewer because it's a very engaged viewer. It's an active viewing experience because they're actually tuning in to watch the game. So what we've seen so far is, July, the first month of July of the quarter, sorry, July started off a little bit slow. And then once August kicked in and, MLB came back and then NHL, NBA, and the viewership has been up. The demand has been there. There's been some excellent playoffs. We've had the Islanders are still involved. They're doing a great job in the Stanley Cup. We had the Giants kick off Monday Night Football, which is all excellent programming for people. And one of the things that we also have the ability to do during the pandemic to take a step back was we were able to use set-top box data to take a look at those sports viewers. When they did watch the NBA, what were they now watching? So we were able to watch where the eyeballs went, what entertainment networks that Danielle was speaking of did they go to? So they went from TNT watching the NBA or ESPN, and then they migrated over to maybe Discovery or other channels. So it was really great that we were able to have a tool like that to help advertisers reach those eyeballs when there were no sports available.
Danielle, how can we best use data to maximize our understanding of the consumer and their motivations?
Well, I think Michael just gave perfect examples of exactly what he was talking about is exactly the best way to use data. And I think now more than ever, you really have to lean on data because of the fact that things are changing so rapidly. Consumer behavior is changing so rapidly. And not only is it changing, it's changing on a hyper geographic level. So you really have to look at what's happening with restrictions of COVID, because that's impacting what viewership is, for example, on a geographic level. And so I think what marketers need to do is they need to look to see what consumer behavior is, then they need to lean into that consumer behavior and then test and learn. And that to me is the most important thing. And I think that advanced TV allows you to do that, being able to go in and either test different creative or maybe test different strategies or test different day parts. And then you can take that and you can scale it out larger. And to me, that is one of the advantages of advanced TV. And I think that's a real plus for marketers and can give them some really great learnings and some really great insights moving forward.
Michael, what was the biggest change you noticed with advertisers at the height of the pandemic? How did creative, messaging, and strategy change?
Creative was the biggest change, and I give a big kudos to the agencies who really adapted when a lot of people were staying home. They had to pivot and move the message from a sales message more towards a, we're here for you message. It was a thank you message to the first responders, the people who are on the front lines. And so when they did that, it was great. It was great to see that. But then you had to also walk that fine line where there was that fatigue of that message. You didn't want it to be like, oh, here's another advertiser who's here for me, but is trying to sell me something at the same time. And they did a great job of that. And then when the pandemic started, when people started coming out, there was great messaging out there where there was, deferred payments for autos and things like that. And then the destinations, even if you couldn't travel, they were letting you know, hey, we're here for when you're ready to travel. So they really did an excellent job with the creative, I got to say. And that's really the number one change that I noticed during and at the beginning of the pandemic.
Linda, how do your strategies fundamentally differ in New York from other markets, and why?
Team One doesn't do cookie cutter plans for any of our Lexus Dealer Association markets. We do work to set core strategies and objectives that are overarching, but then we work to achieve them based on market nuances that are grounded in data as well as market capabilities. For example, New York is one market where we execute linear addressable TV because the interconnect is uniquely able to execute that tactic. Our New York market clients also lean into many testing opportunities and use of data and technology to connect with shoppers in different ways.
Danielle, did viewers sign on for more platforms during the pandemic? And if so, where was the expansion?
Yeah, absolutely. What we saw is that streaming really went through the roof. And that basically going into COVID, most people had subscriptions to paid platforms. So Netflix, Amazon Prime, and then we saw even before COVID, people started signing up for maybe Disney Plus. But what happened during COVID is people were looking for more content. They were thirsty for it. And yet they didn't want to pay additional price for it. So that's where we saw adoption of free streaming service or the AVOD services. And so what happened was people started stacking services on top of one another. And so we're actually coming out with a research study, custom research study that looks at streaming and what happened during COVID. And what we saw in our study is that over 30% of people actually now subscribe to over 4 streaming services. And those streaming services are a mixture of both paid and AVOD services. And what we found is the people who had tried and tested the AVOD services really liked them. They were happy with the ad load. They appreciated that they got the free content because of watching the ads. Overall, they cited that they enjoyed the content and they were happy with the content that they got. And so what this says to us is that in the future, that the AVOD platform and the AVOD model is probably going to do pretty well.
That's very interesting. Michael, which verticals are increasing spending and which lines of businesses experienced a slowdown? Who do you see coming back and possibly predict when? And what are the most active advertiser categories now?
Well, from the start, healthcare and pharmaceutical really came in strong during the pandemic, obviously, to get the message out. Auto and travel, they were 2 major categories that really slowed down. And from the perspective of people coming back, it seems like just about every category is coming back, not to the full capacity, but coming back at a slower pace, but still being active, because everybody's coming back into the market to sell their products, to have products available for customers. So that's one of the things that we see is everybody coming back at a slower pace than in years prior, because that's generally what we start to compare everything to, is how was everything, how did it look last year or last quarter or the quarter before. So now we're seeing it as a slower migration, but most people are coming back and active in the market.
Danielle, this has been a question that's been on my mind. If more viewers were consuming content, why did ad spend decrease? Was it based on uncertainty, fear of being tone deaf, lack of relevant creative? What do you think?
Well, what we saw is that in the first few weeks after the pandemic hit, 89% of advertisers took some sort of action with their budget. And there was for all different reasons. As Michael just talked about, there were some categories that went off the air and it was completely understandable. They had no more business. And so that was part of it. And then there were other categories that pulled off the air or decreased their spend because of the fact that they wanted to change their creative, that they felt that their messaging was tone deaf, that they felt that they wanted to make sure that they had correct incentive, as Linda talked about before. The automotive manufacturers came out with, incentives, which made a lot of sense for COVID. And then there also were a lot of advertisers, or some advertisers, who pulled off their spend completely. And those are the ones who, as we've done an analysis that looked at over 100 years of data as to what to do during an economic crisis, we found that those are the advertisers who, when the crisis is over, are going to have to really dig out, because of the fact that you've done a lot of damage if you go dark and don't advertise during this time. And even though it's hard, and even though there's a lot of justification to continue to advertise when you're in an economic uncertainty, what we have found is that because you're dark and your competitors continue to advertise, you typically lose a significant amount of market share. And so this is a time where it's not the time to go dark if you can. It's the time to continue to advertise. So it's better to go off the air for a little bit, think about your strategy, come back with a message that makes sense, and come back with incentives that make sense.
Michael, what do you project for fourth quarter 2020?
I'm projecting the quarter, it's coming on strong. Right now, political is very active, which is great. The cars have come back. I think when we sort of see towards the tail end of the quarter, if the travel and tourism category comes back, it'll really turn out to be a strong quarter. With a turnaround like this, it's kind of like, steering an aircraft carrier. You don't just turn it on a dime. It's a slow progression. And we've seen that since the beginning of April, where it's been turning and turning and turning and getting back to a somewhat normal level. And we hope to be there, by December, but maybe it's going to be into, first quarter of 2021. But the good thing is we've been seeing progress, and we've been seeing it go up every month that we've been around.
Well, that's good news. Linda, is there anything else you want media companies to understand about your needs at this time?
Well, it's interesting. As media content and channels and devices proliferate, it's not only creating more options for consumers, it's also creating more options for advertisers and their agencies. It's not enough for media companies to provide targeting and reach. They need to be reaching the right people at the right time with the right, on the best content, and really be driving return on investment and be able to produce data based on sound methodology to prove it.
Michael, finishing up the session with the last question. What advice can you give advertisers to maximize their buys in today's New York market environment?
I think a lot to what the point of Linda just made is really see what you can do with the vendors that you work with to get that ROI, and it'll be good for everybody.
Well, I want to thank all of you. It's been a fascinating session, and I appreciate your insights and your time.
Thank you, Charlene.
Thank you very much.
Need to reach the right audience with the full power of TV? You got it. NYI connects brands to over 20 million people in the largest TV market. And it's all powered by our rich data, precise targeting, and conversion analytics. Intelligent media planning and attribution that closes the campaign loop and proves your ROI. One buy, every screen. The future of media buying is here.